60 years after the Orphan train left this platform, a private railcar brought a federal judge back to it.
I'm looking for a woman. She'd be about 70 now. Her name, I never knew it.
Sit straight when we stop. No one takes home a slouching child. The matron read the rule off a card she held in her lap, without looking up, the way you say a thing you have said 1,000 times and no longer hear. She was not an unkind woman. She had shepherded 4 cars of children west across the whole broad back of the country, and she had learned that kindness spent early ran out before Nebraska. At the window sat a boy named Elias, 10 years old and small for it, and he pressed his forehead against the cold glass and watched the country go by. The train ran west out of the morning, west along the shining new rails of the Union Pacific line, and the land had been getting emptier for 2 days, the towns thinning, the trees giving out, the sky opening up until it was most of the world. Somewhere behind them was New York, where he had been born, and where nobody had kept him. Somewhere ahead was a place he did not know the name of yet, where he was meant to be chosen. He sat as straight as he could make himself sit. He had learned, by then, that it did not help. You should know what kind of train it was, because everything that follows hangs on it. They called it the Orphan train, though no sign on it said so. It was an ordinary passenger car hired by a children's aid society back east, filled with children nobody could feed, the ones the great cold city had too many of, orphaned or half-orphaned, or simply given up by parents who could not watch them starve. The society did a plain hard thing about it. It put them on the westbound trains and carried them out to the new country, where families were said to be short of hands and long on room. And it stopped the train at town after town and let the children off onto the platform to be looked over and chosen and taken home. 20 years of trains, and near 200,000 children carried west on them. Most found a place. That was the truth of it, and it was a good truth. But the way of it was hard, and no gentle telling can make it otherwise. A child stood on a platform, in a strange town, with a number pinned to his coat, and waited to see whether a stranger would want him. Elias had a number pinned to his coat. He could feel the weight of the little tin card over his heart when he breathed. At the first town, the car emptied out onto the boards, and the families came. They came the way you come to a stock sale, not cruel about it, most of them, just careful, just looking to bring home something that would earn its keep. A farmer wants a strong back. A woman wants a sweet face to raise. So the hands went first to the big boys, the ones who looked like they could fork hay by spring, and then to the pretty children, the round-cheeked little ones a childless wife could love on sight. A man turned a boy by the shoulder to see the set of him. A woman crouched to look into a small girl's face, and something in her own face opened. And that was that. And the girl was lifted up and carried off down the platform into her life. It happened fast, when it happened. That was the thing Elias noticed first. Being wanted took no time at all. Nobody's hand went to Elias. He was small, first of all, a head shorter than boys his own age, thin through the chest, no use at a plough. And when a family did stop, now and then, and a man asked him his name, the word would not come. It caught in his throat and doubled on itself. Elias. And he would feel the heat climb his neck while the man's face changed. Not to unkindness, only to a kind of doubt. A stepping back. And the man would nod and say, well, and move on down the line to a child who could say his own name plain. So Elias learned to fold his hands on his knees and be quiet, and be still, and want nothing where anyone could see him want it. He had worked out already, in the wordless arithmetic of a child, that the safest thing was to ask for nothing. A boy who asks for nothing cannot be told no. It kept the hurt smaller. It also, though, he did not yet know this, kept the hands from ever reaching for him at all. There was one town where he was nearly taken. A big-shouldered farmer stopped in front of him, blocking the low sun, and looked him over a good while, and then reached out and closed one hard hand over Elias's upper arm, testing it the way you test a green branch to see if it will bear. Elias held as still as he could and tried to make the arm feel strong under the man's fingers. He wanted it so badly in that moment that he forgot to be careful about wanting. He looked up into the farmer's face with the whole of it showing. The farmer felt the thinness of the arm and let it go, and shook his head, not unkind, and said to the matron, "He'd not last me a season." And he went on to the next boy. Elias put his arm back in his lap. He did not cry. He had already learned that crying on the platform frightened the families worse than anything, that a weeping child was the one child no hand ever reached for. So he swallowed it down where it did not show, and it went somewhere inside him and stayed. The matron kept a book, and in the book was every child's name, and by every name a line she would draw when the child was placed. Elias watched her draw them. Town by town the lines got made and the car got emptier, and the drawn names outnumbered the ones still waiting. He learned to read the book upside down from across the aisle, and his own name was near the bottom of it, undrawn, in the matron's small, tired hand, Elias Thorne. Every night there were fewer children to fill the seats, and the empty seats were the loudest thing in the car, and Elias would count the ones left and know, without being told, that he was among the last of a thing that was running out. There came a night he could not sleep, and lay listening to the wheels, and thought a thought that a child should never have room in him to think. Maybe, he thought, I am not a boy that gets taken. Maybe some are made to be chosen and some are made to be the ones left. The way some seed comes up and some just doesn't. And it is nobody's fault, and there is no help for it, and it is only a thing to be born. He turned it over in the dark, and it did not frighten him the way you would expect. It settled him almost. If there was no help for it, then he could stop the terrible daily hoping, which was the part that hurt. He could just be the boy that was left, and bear it, and want nothing. It is a quiet thing when a child stops hoping. It makes no sound at all. That is how you can be standing right next to it, and never know. On the third morning, the matron closed her book and spoke to the 7 children left, and her voice had changed. "Kestrel Junction," she said, "in Nebraska. It's the last stop on the line for us." She looked at them, the 7, and whatever she meant to say, she said plainer than she wanted to. "Those that find a place there, find a place. Those that don't will ride back east with me. There's no more towns west of it that have asked for children." Nobody spoke. Outside the window, the country ran flat and copper to the edge of the sky, and the first few buildings began to show far off, low and grey, against all that grass, and a water tower, and the thin dark line of a street. Elias looked at his hands in his lap. Last stop. He understood it the way you understand a door at the end of a hall. He counted without meaning to, the towns behind them where he had not been chosen. He had lost the count somewhere back in Iowa. The train came into Kestrel Junction in the long copper light of late afternoon, and the brakes cried and it stopped. It was a small place, a railroad place, the kind of town the railroad had made out of nothing, but the need for a stopping point, a town whose whole reason for standing where it stood was the two shining rails that ran through the middle of it. There was a grain house and a water tower and a single street of false-fronted stores. And there was the depot, low and red. And there was the platform. And along the platform, weathered grey, worn smooth on its seat by 20 years of waiting travelers, there was a bench. Word of the Orphan train had come ahead on the wire, and so the people of Kestrel Junction had gathered, some come to take a child, more come only to watch, the way a small town turns out for anything at all that breaks the sameness of its days. They stood along the platform in the falling light and watched the 7 children come down off the car and line up on the boards, small and blinking, each with a number pinned over the heart. It was the last choosing, and it was the worst, because there were so few children, and Elias could see the arithmetic of it plain. The families came along the short line, the way they had come along every line. And the same thing happened that had happened in every town, only quicker now, because the choosing pool was small, and the good ones went first and fast. A stout boy went to a wheat farmer inside a minute. 2 sisters, who had held hands the whole way from New York and begged not to be parted, were taken together by a widow with a soft, wrecked face, and went off down the platform, weeping with relief. A pretty small child went into a young wife's arms. One by one, the numbers were unpinned, and the children were led away into the copper light, into the town, into the rest of their lives. Elias stood at the end of the line and said his prayers with his whole small body, stood straight, held his chin, looked willing, but not grasping everything he had learned in 3 days and 1,000 miles. And one by one the families passed in front of him and looked and moved on. Nobody stopped in front of Elias. It was not that they were cruel to him. It was that their eyes went over him and did not catch, the way your eye goes over a stone in a field it has no use for. He watched the last child taken. He watched the families turn away with their new sons and daughters and start back up the platform, talking now, easy, the business of the day concluded. He watched the little crowd of watchers begin to thin, drifting off towards supper, the show over, and he stood where he was, at the end of the boards, with the number still pinned over his heart, and the platform emptied out around him, until he was the thing left on it. The matron did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say that would not have been worse than the quiet. She only touched his shoulder once, and went to see to the car, and Elias walked to the grey bench at the end of the platform and sat down on it, small at one end, and waited for the dark. Because when the dark came, the eastbound train would come and carry him back the way he had come, unchosen, to a city that had already decided it had no room. Off down the tracks the engine breathed and ticked as it cooled. The light was going out of the sky, copper to ash. A boy of 10 sat alone on a bench at the end of the world and did not cry because there was no longer anyone he was crying to. He had come at last to the far end of being left. He put his hands together in his lap and made himself very still and very small, and got ready to bear it. He did not know he was being watched. At the edge of the thinning crowd where the platform gave onto the road, a girl stood and looked at him. Had been looking at him, in fact, since the choosing began. She was 12, a farm girl from a place just out past the grain house, in a dress that had been mended at the elbow and let down twice at the hem, and she had a plain, steady, wide-awake face and a pair of dark eyes that did not miss much. Her name was Ada. She had come with her mother to see the train, the way the whole town had come, and she had watched the children get taken one by one, and she had watched the one at the end not get taken, and something about the way he had gone on sitting up, straight after there was no longer any reason to, had got into her, and would not let her leave. The dark came down, and the platform emptied to nothing, and still Elias sat. The families were gone home to their suppers with their new children. The watchers were gone. The matron was down at the far end seeing to the car, away east, where the rails ran off into the coming night. The return train waited on a siding with its lamp lit, and every little while its engine would sigh, a great patient animal getting ready to take him back. The wind came across the platform off all that grass and found the gap in his coat. Elias drew his knees up onto the bench and made himself smaller. He was as alone just then as it is given to a person to be, a child at the exact bottom of the world, with nothing coming toward him but the train that would carry away the last of his hoping. He heard the boards creak and looked up, and the girl was there. She did not say anything at first. She came along the platform in the dark, and she sat down on the bench, not close, at the far end of it, the whole length of grey wood between them, and she looked out at the tracks the way he was looking out at the tracks, as though the two of them had only happened to be waiting for the same thing. Elias went still and watchful, the way a left child goes still, not knowing what a person wants, who comes to him for no reason, having learned that people mostly came for a reason, and the reason mostly cost him something. She swung her feet a little. She was working up to a thing. He could feel her working up to it, down at her end of the bench. Then she slid down the bench toward him, and reached into the pocket of her mended dress, and brought out her hand closed, and held it out to him over the grey boards. Elias looked at the closed hand and did not understand it. She waited, and after a while he put his own hand out under hers, because that was plainly what she wanted, and she opened her fingers and dropped a thing into his palm, small and hard and warm from her pocket. He turned it to the last grey light. It was a penny, a single copper penny, worn thin and smooth, the kind of coin a farm girl might have to her whole name in the world. It sat in the cup of his hand, hardly weighing anything, warm from being carried. It was almost nothing. A child would tell you it was almost nothing, and she would have told you so herself. And it was the first thing that anyone, in the whole of his life that he could remember, had ever put into his hand, meaning for him to keep it. If a girl closing a boy's fingers around a copper penny in the dark has you leaning in, you might think about following this channel, but only once the story's good and done with you. He was still staring at the penny when she said it. She said it plain, the way you tell a person a thing you have decided is true, looking not at him but out at the dark tracks where the trains came and went. Nobody doesn't want you, Ada said. Your people are just farther down the line. Elias lifted his head and looked at her. He did not have any words for it. He never had words when he most needed them. That was half his trouble in the world. So he said nothing at all, and only held the penny, and let the sentence go down into him, past the number pinned to his coat, past 3 days and 1,000 miles of not being chosen, down to the place where he had that very evening laid down his hoping for good. And it landed there like a coal in cold ash, and something in him that had gone out began very faintly, without his leave, to burn again. Then the whistle blew, long and low down the line, and everything moved at once. The return train was coming up off the siding to take on its passengers. Down the platform the matron's voice rose, calling the children that were left. There were 2 others. Elias was not the only one riding back east. And out of the dark, at the road's edge, a woman's voice called too, sharp with the particular worry of a mother who has lost sight of her girl after dark. Ada, Ada, we're going. The girl's head came up. She looked at Elias and opened her mouth. And there was a thing she meant to say or ask. Her name, his name, some small, ordinary thread to tie the 2 of them together. But her mother called again, nearer and sharper, and a hand came and there was no time. She was pulled back before either of them had said a name. Her mother came out of the dark and took her by the wrist, not roughly, only in a hurry, scolding low about the cold and the hour, and drew her up off the bench and away, down the platform toward the road. Ada went backward for the first few steps, looking at him, and Elias sat with the penny closed hard in his fist and looked back at her. And neither of them said the thing, because there was no time. And then the dark and the crowd of the road took her, and she was gone. He did not know her name. She did not know his. 3 minutes on a bench, and a penny, and 1 sentence. And that was to be the whole of it. Or so it seemed that night, and would seem for 60 years. The matron's hand found his shoulder, and he got up and went where he was led, and climbed the iron steps of the eastbound car, and took a seat by the window, and put his fist with the penny in it against his chest. The train pulled out. Kestrel Junction slid backward past the glass, the lit depot, the grain house, the water tower going black against the last of the west. And Elias watched the platform go, and the grey bench on it, empty now, and he could not see the girl anywhere in the dark. He pressed his forehead to the cold window, the way he had pressed it 100 times going west. Only now they were running the other way, east, back toward the two-full city, unchosen, the last boy on the platform. But his hand was not empty this time. His hand was closed around a warm copper penny, and there were 7 words shut inside his chest with it, and they were his, and no one could take them back down the line. Late in the night, when the others slept and the car was dark, he opened his hand and looked at it. There was hardly any light, just the cold blue of the moon coming and going on the plains outside. But he did not need light. He knew the penny by feel already, the worn face of it, the thin, smooth edge. He held it up close in the dark and turned it, and moved his lips without any sound, the way you say a thing you do not want even yourself to hear you saying, for fear of wearing it out. Farther down the line, he told the dark. Just farther down the line. There were 2 other children in that car riding back east, and Elias came to understand, in the way children understand each other without talking, that they were carrying the same thing he was. They did not speak of it. You do not speak of it. But he saw it in the way the girl across the aisle held her mouth, and the way the smaller boy behind her had gone quiet and watchful and old. And he knew they were feeling the thing he was feeling. The great flat shame of having been looked over by every family in the West and found to be the child not worth the taking. It was a shame you could not say out loud, so the 3 of them rode east in the dark and said nothing. A small freight of unchosen children going back to the place that had sent them. And only Elias of the 3 had anything in his fist to hold against it. Somewhere in Iowa, he did a thing that he would go on doing, in one form or another, for the rest of his life. He tore a strip off the lining of his coat, the coat that had been 2 other boys' coats before it was his, and he wrapped the penny in it, careful, and he put the small soft bundle inside his shirt against his skin, over his heart, where a boy keeps a thing he cannot afford to lose. He did not fully know why he did it. He only knew that the penny had stopped being money the moment she closed his fingers on it, and had become instead the one proof he had that a person had once, for 3 minutes on a bench, seen him and thought him worth a thing. And a boy will guard the one proof he owns of his own worth more carefully than gold. He kept the words wrapped up with it, the way you keep a sparrow, the way you keep the few things that are actually yours. The train ran on east through the dark, and Elias did not cry. That was the strange thing, that would have surprised anyone who saw only the outside of him, the small, unchosen boy going back to nothing. He had every cause to cry, and he did not. He sat with his hand over the bundle against his heart and watched the black land go by. And every so often, when the shame came up in him and wanted to drown him, he would touch the small, hard shape of the penny through his shirt and say the words over to himself, silent, and the shame would go back down. He had been given, on the worst night of his short life, exactly one thing to hold, and it turned out to be enough to hold him. That is a thing worth knowing about a penny or about a sentence. Neither one weighs enough to feel in the hand. Both are heavy enough to carry a life. And here is where this part must leave him. A boy going east with his forehead on cold glass, and a copper penny wrapped against his heart. Look at him a moment before we let him go. The moon comes and goes on the window, and comes and goes on his face 10 years old. And the wheels go on under him, carrying him back to a city that did not want him. And his eyes are open in the dark, and his fist is closed. And the last thing you can see, as the light fails, is the boy's face reflected in the cold black glass. Hold that reflection, because 60 years from this night, on a morning in October, a train will stand at that same platform in Kestrel Junction, and a face will come to a window very like this one. An old man's face now, lined and grey and grave, the face of a federal judge, stepping down off a private rail car into the fog. And if you look from the boy's window to the old man's window and back, you would not be able to say, for the life of you, where the one face ended and the other began. A federal judge, come all this way, and he won't say her name. The newspaper man said it low, out of the side of his mouth, to nobody in particular, standing on the plank walk in the cold October fog with his hat pushed back, and a notebook he had not yet found a use for. His name was Cole, and he had come up from the city on the same train as the story, because a federal judge who charters a private railcar to a nothing railroad town in Nebraska and then stands on the platform asking after a woman he cannot name is a story, whatever else it is. And Cole knew a story, the way a hound knows a scent. Around him the town of Kestrel Junction stirred and murmured, and did not know what it had on its hands. 60 years the place had stood on its two rails, and nothing had ever come to it grander than the weather. Now there was a private car on the siding with the blinds half drawn, and a great old man in a black coat walking its one street, and a question loose in the streets that had no bottom to it. Who was the woman, and why would the richest man ever to set foot in the county not say her name? But you know the woman, and you know the name, because you were on the platform 60 years back. So this part must do a hard thing. It must carry a boy the whole length of a life in a few minutes, and it will do it the only honest way, which is to keep one small copper thing always in the frame. They sent Elias back east, and east was no kinder than it had been, and he was shunted through the crowded rooms of the Aid Society for a season, until a printer in Iowa sent word he wanted a boy. Not a son, a boy, cheap, to sweep and to fetch and to learn the trade if he lasted. So Elias went west again, a little way this time, and became a printer's devil in a shop in a river town, ink to the elbows, and slept on a cot in the back among the paper. And every night, when the shop was shut and the pressman gone home, the boy took a small rag bundle out from against his heart and unwrapped it, and held a worn copper penny up to the one lamp and looked at it a while before he slept. The trade saved his tongue, though it took the doing of it slow. A boy who stammers cannot easily say a word, but a boy who sets type must build every word letter by letter with his hands, backwards and one piece at a time. And there is no hurry in it and no stranger's face waiting on it. And something in that unknotted the thing in Elias's throat by degrees. He would stand at the case in the lamplight and set a line, and then alone, with the coin set up on the little shelf of the type case where he could see it, he would read the line out soft to the empty shop, and found letter by letter, night by night, that the words came out whole. The stammer did not vanish. It loosened. It stopped being a wall and became only a stone he learned to step over. Just farther down the line, he would tell the dock shop sometimes for no reason, setting the coin back in its rag. He did not fully know any more whether he believed it. He only knew he was not going to be the one to stop saying it. Type led to reading, and reading to books, and books, in a country that was building its courts as fast as it built its rails, led a poor, sharp young man toward the law. We must go fast here, because a life goes fast when you are not the one living it. The borrowed law books read past midnight, the clocking for a country lawyer, the long climb up out of nothing that this country, for all its hardness, did now and then still let a man make. Only mark the one thing that did not change through all of it. On every desk he ever read at, through every cold winter of study, in the circle of every lamp, there sat a worn copper penny, kept where his eye could fall on it, the one fixed star over a life that was slowly, against all its beginnings, coming up in the world. 60 years, and now we come back to October, and the fog, and the town, and to a room a long way from Kestrel Junction, which you must see for one moment before the town can make any sense. In a federal courthouse, in a far city, there was a courtroom, and at the head of it, a high bench of dark oak where the judge sat. And any lawyer who had ever pleaded before Judge Elias Thorne could have told you the small, strange thing about that bench. There was a coin on it, a single worn copper penny, old past reading, set at the front edge of the great oak bench, where the judge's hand could reach it, in plain view of the whole court. Nobody knew why. Nobody had ever dared ask. It sat there through every case he ever heard, 30 years of them, and the men who argued their lives out before that bench learned to see it and say nothing. That is all. A penny on a judge's bench for 60 years. The story does not need to tell you what he thought of it, and it will not. It only needs you to know the coin was there. Now the search turned the town over the way a plow turns sod. Word had gone out. The judge was looking for a woman, about 70, and he would pay, it was said, though he had named no sum, to any who could bring her to him, or bring him true word of her. And in a poor town in a poor year, in the second autumn of a depression that had emptied the granaries and stilled the mills, the word ran through Kestrel Junction like fire in dry grass. Every household turned it over at its own table. Who was she? Who among the old women of the county could be worth a private rail car and a judge's fortune? The street filled up with talk, and the talk fed on itself. And by the second day, there was scarcely a soul in the town who was not, in the privacy of the heart, running down the list of the old and the poor and wondering. The first of them came to him at the store, and her name was Ruth Calloway. Ruth kept the boarding house and had a share in the mercantile, and she was not a bad woman. Hold on to that, for the story will need it later. She was only a woman who had worked hard her whole life for small notice, and had a hunger in her for it that she herself would not have named. She had thought and thought, and she had remembered, or half remembered, or built out of wanting, a morning long ago when the orphan train stopped, and she put on her good shawl, and came to where the judge stood, and told him. "I gave that boy bread," Ruth said, "the one that got left. I remember it plain. Took it out to him on the platform with my own hands, a good half loaf. I couldn't have him go hungry." The judge looked at her. He did not argue, and he did not thank her. He took the penny from his coat pocket. The town would come to know that gesture well before the week was out, and held it a moment in his open hand where she could see it, and watched her face while she looked at it. Her face made nothing of it. It was a penny. And the judge closed his hand and shook his head once and turned away, and Ruth was left standing with her good shawl and her half loaf, and no notion on earth what she had failed. The second came the next morning at the door of the meeting hall, and she had a better story, because word of Ruth's failure had got about, and the tellers had learned to aim higher. "I gave him $5, this one said, a Mrs. Teal, sharp and certain with her chin up. 5 whole dollars, and that was a deal of money in '71, and to a strange orphan child. I gave it to him off my own egg money the day he was sent back. You ask anybody." Nobody could have asked anybody. There was no one to ask. But she said it the way you say a thing you have told yourself until it is true. The judge took out the penny. He held it in his open palm before her and looked not at the coin but at her eyes while she looked at it. And again the coin meant nothing to the face that looked at it. And again the great old hand closed over it, And again the grey head shook, once, slow. What he was measuring he did not say. He said nothing at all. He put the penny away and walked on, and the town watched him go and grew hungrier for the answer with every door he closed. And all this time, at the very back of every gathering, unnoticed by every soul in it, sat the woman he had come for. She sat at the back of the meeting hall the evening the town came together to talk the thing over. On the last bench by the door, a small old woman in a shawl gone thin at the fold, with a sewing basket held on her knees, because she took in mending, and there was no hour of the day she could afford to let her hands lie idle. Her name was Ada. She was 72 years old. Her hands were bent now with the years and the needle, and her back was rounded from bending over other people's torn things, by other people's lamps. And she had been so long unregarded in that town that she had become a kind of furniture in it, a thing the eye passed over, the way an eye passes over a stone in a field it has no use for. She listened to them wonder aloud who the woman could be, and she held her basket and said nothing, and did not once let herself think it might be her. Later, alone in the rented room she could barely keep, Ada sat by a small fire and turned it over, the way you turn a thing you have forbidden yourself to want. She remembered the platform. Of course she remembered the platform. A girl of 12, and a boy at the end of the bench that nobody took, and a penny out of her pocket, and something she had said to him that she could no longer bring back word for word. But that was 60 years gone, and it had been nothing, hadn't it? A penny, a child's penny, and a few words a girl says and forgets. It was nothing, she told the fire. A person doesn't cross a country for a penny, and under that, quieter, the thing that truly kept her in her chair. Even if, look at me. She drew the thin shawl close. I couldn't stand up in front of the whole town in this shawl and say it was me, not looking like what I've come to. They'd laugh, and they'd be right to. And so she banked her little fire and went to her bed, and did not go to him, and told herself she was only being sensible. There was a thing moving toward Ada that autumn, from the other side, that had nothing to do with the judge, and it made her silence heavier than pride alone could have made it. The county kept a poorhouse out past the river for the old, with no one to keep them. And in a hard year, the county looked hard at the rolls, and Ada Coyle's rented room was 3 months behind, and her hands were slowing, and the mending she could take in was less every season as the town's own money thinned. So her name had gone onto a list at the county office, a list of the old poor to be looked at, come the new year, for removal to the county home. She knew it was there. It sat under everything else she felt, the cold, certain arithmetic of it. A woman with no people, at the end of her usefulness, was a thing a county tidied away. It was one more reason to make herself small. You do not stand up and announce yourself to a judge when you are 3 months from the poorhouse. You keep still and hope the year forgets you. By the 3rd day, the reward had grown in the telling, and so had the line of women who came to claim it. They came to the judge's lodging now, waiting in the cold street for him to come out, each with her hoarded scrap of a story. And the stories got bolder as they got less true, because the timid tellers had all been turned away, and only the bold ones were left to try. I nursed him when he took fever. I hid him from the matron. I gave him my own boy's coat, and each of them the judge met the same way. And the town by now had learned the whole of the ceremony and would watch for it. The old man's hand going to the coat pocket, the penny coming out into the open palm, the long look, not at the coin, at the face above it, and then the hand closing and the head shaking once, and the woman turning away with the thing she had wanted, held further out of reach than ever. What the coin asked of their faces, none of them could give, because none of them had been on the far end of that bench in the dark. But nobody in the street could see that. All they could see was a rich old man saying no, and no, and no. It was Cole, the newspaper man, who turned a quiet search into a spectacle, and he did it for the reason such things are always done, which was that it made a good column, and a good column was his living. He wired his stories east, and they were printed and picked up and printed again, and within the week the thing had a name in the papers, the judge and the woman with no name. And the curious began to come in on the trains to see it, a few at first and then more, so that the platform Elias had been left standing on as a boy now filled daily with strangers hoping to be there when the mystery broke. The town, that had been a nothing on the line, swelled and buzzed. Cole walked through the middle of it pleased, a man who has struck a small vein and means to work it. He did not think much about the woman herself, whoever she was. That is the way of the outsider who comes to make a story of other people's lives. He sees the shape of the thing and sells it, and does not always trouble to learn that there is a heart at the center of the shape, still beating, that his story is squeezing. On the fourth evening, when the strangers had gone into their suppers, and the platform stood empty in the fog, the judge walked down to the depot alone. He went out along the boards to the far end, where the old grey bench stood. The same bench, worn smoother now by 60 more years of waiting travellers, but the same wood, the same place. And he stood over it a while in the cold, and then he sat down on it, at one end, the way a small person sits who is leaving room. He did not speak, and there was no one to speak to, and the story will not tell you what was in him, because it was on the platform with him, and it is not the platform's to tell. It will only tell you what the fog and the empty rails could see. A great old man in a black coat, sitting alone at one end of a grey bench, very still, while the light went out of the sky over Nebraska. And because you were on that platform 60 years ago, you can see the thing the fog could not. You can see, sitting at the other end of the same bench, in the same failing copper light, a small boy of 10, with a number pinned to his coat, and a penny closed in his fist. The two of them are there together on the grey wood, the boy and the old man he became. The whole length of a life laid out between one end of a bench and the other, and neither one looking at the other, both looking out at the tracks where the trains come and go. The town cannot see it. The town does not know yet that the grand old man on its depot bench is the boy it once could not be bothered to take home. Only you know. That is the whole ache of this part of the story, that you can see both of them on the bench, and the town, standing right there, can see only one. Ada saw him on the bench. She had come down toward the depot in the dusk on an errand, a collar to deliver, a few cents to earn, and she stopped at the head of the platform when she saw the figure at the far end of it, and she stood in the fog and looked. She could not have said what took hold of her then, It was the way he sat, perhaps. An old man leaving room at the end of a bench for someone who was not there. Something in it reached back 60 years and touched the girl she had been, and her heart turned over hard in her chest, and a word she would not let all the way up rose partway in her. It couldn't be. She stood a moment longer, gripping the wrapped collar, on the very edge of walking out onto those boards. And then the old fear closed back over her. The shore, the poorhouse list, the whole town watching. The certainty that a woman like her did not walk up to a man like that. And she stepped back into the fog and turned and went home with the collar undelivered, and hated herself the whole way for a coward. While she went home, the thing that would undo her silence was being found by other hands. Cole, hunting his story, had gone through the county office, looking for old women the search might fit. That was the newspaper man's trade, to turn over papers other people left lying. And he had come upon the poorhouse rolls, and running his finger down the list of the county's cast-off old, he had stopped at a name. Ada Coyle, widow, 72. Late on her room, marked for removal in the new year. No people to keep her. He did not yet know it was the name. He only knew it was the kind of name a good story likes. A woman the county was about to sweep into the poorhouse. In the same week, a judge was scattering a fortune to find a woman of just that age. He tore the sheet loose, or copied it. It comes to the same thing. And he folded it into his coat, and he went looking for where the two lines might cross. So this part ends with two people, and a bench, and a folded paper, and none of them yet touching. At the far end of the platform, all through that cold night, the judge sat on the grey bench and did not go in. The fog came off the plains and beaded on his black coat, and the town's lamps went out one by one behind him, and still he sat. An old man keeping some vigil the town could not read, at one end of a bench, leaving room. And across town, in a lit window, the newspaper man sat, with a folded sheet of county paper in his hand, and a name on it, Ada Coyle. Turning it over, feeling the shape of a story about to break, not yet knowing that the woman on his paper and the woman on the old judge's mind were the same woman, and that he was holding, without knowing it, the one thread that would pull the whole thing open. Two facts, moving toward each other in the dark. The old man on the bench, and the name on the list. Come morning, they would meet. The judge leaves tomorrow. Tonight he means to tell us why. The man carried the word down the street from the meeting hall door, where a notice had been put up in the judge's own hand, and the word ran through Kestrel Junction faster than any notice could. He was leaving. After a week of the penny and the closed hand and the long looks and the woman with no name, the great old man was leaving on the morning train. But first tonight, in the meeting hall, before the whole of the town, he would stand up and say what he had come for. The town could hardly wait the day out. Whatever the thing was that a judge crossed a country and spent a fortune to find, they were going to hear it named at last. And there was not a soul in the valley who meant to miss the hearing of it. They filled the meeting hall wall to wall that night, the whole of Kestrel Junction, because a town will always come to see a thing settled, and this was the strangest thing that had ever come to settle among them. The lamps were lit down the long room, and the benches packed, and the aisles standing, farmers and shopkeepers, and the boarding house women, and Cole the newspaper man, up near the front with his notebook. and the curious who had come in on the trains, crowded at the back and along the walls. And at the very back of it all, by the door, where she could slip out if it got to be too much, stood a small old woman in a thin shawl, with a sewing basket over her arm, because she had not been able to make herself stay away, and had not been able to make herself sit down among them either. Ada stood by the door and held her basket and told herself she had only come to hear, like everyone else. Her heart was going hard, and she did not fully know why. The room went quiet when the judge stood up, the way a room goes quiet on its own, when a big thing is about to happen in it. He was a long time getting to his feet, an old man, and the week had cost him. And he stood at the front of the hall in his black coat, with the lamplight on his grey head. And he did not speak at once. He reached into his coat pocket. The whole room watched the hand go in, because the whole town knew that pocket by now, knew what came out of it, had watched him show it to a week's worth of claiming women, and close it again on everyone. The hand came out. He held it up before them all, and opened it, and there in the middle of his broad old palm, small and worn, and copper in the lamplight, lay the penny. I was the child, the judge said, that no one on this platform ever chose. The words went across the room, and the room made a sound, a low sound, an intake, the sound a crowd makes when a thing it never guessed turns over in front of it. The grand old man, the private car, the fortune, the federal bench, and he was telling them he had once stood on their own depot platform as an orphan child with a number pinned to his coat, and been looked over by their own grandfathers and grandmothers, and been found not worth the taking, and sent back east in the dark. The penny lay open in his hand while he let them take it in. The thing he had kept hidden a week, the thing he had held closed against every false claim, was open now on his palm for the whole town to see, and not one of them yet understood what it was. He told them the rest of it plainly, in the voice of a man, reading out a record, and the hall did not breathe. He told them of the train that went town to town, and the choosing, and the boy who was too small and stammered his own name, and was passed over in town after town all the long way west. He told them of the last stop, this stop, their stop, and the last choosing, and the bench at the end of the platform, where a boy sat down in the dark to wait for the train that would carry him back to nothing. And he told them that a girl had come out of the dark and sat down at the far end of that bench, a girl whose name he never learned and never after that night saw, and had put a penny into his hand. This penny, he said, and lifted it, and had said a thing to him that he had carried 60 years. The town leaned toward the story with its whole body. Somewhere in it a girl on a bench, a penny, a sentence, and not one of them yet had turned to look at the back of the room. She told me, the judge said, and here his reader's voice went at last uneven, that nobody didn't want me. He stopped. The sentence hung there half-finished in the lamplight, the way a thing hangs when the one saying it cannot for a moment get the rest of it out, and the hall hung with it. Every face turned to the old man at the front and the penny in his open hand, waiting on the other half of the thing the girl had said 60 years ago on the bench in the dark. And into that waiting, from the back of the hall, by the door, in a voice cracked with age and with 60 years, a small old woman finished it for him. "Your people are just farther down the line," Ada said. She had not meant to say it. It came up out of her before the fear could catch it. the words she had said to a boy on a bench when she was 12 years old, come back to her hole across 60 years, and out of her mouth into the silent hall before she knew she had opened it. And the judge at the front went still. And then he turned. Slow, the whole town turning with him. Every head in the packed hall, coming round toward the small forgotten woman by the door, with a sewing basket on her arm. And the hall froze. It froze the way water freezes, all at once and solid, every soul in it caught staring at the last person in the county any of them would ever have looked at twice. Ada Coyle, the mending widow, 3 months from the poorhouse, standing by the door with her hand come up to her own mouth. Then the judge began to walk toward her, and the story has come to the thing it has been walking toward from the start. So read it slow. He came down off the front of the hall and into the aisle, an old man unhurried, and the packed crowd fell back from the aisle on either side to let him through, because there are moments a crowd knows to make way for without being told. He came the whole length of the room, past the front benches, past the boarding house women, past Cole with his forgotten notebook, past every soul who had spent a week wondering and a lifetime looking to the left of the woman by the door. He came all that way, the grandest man ever to stand in that hall, and he stopped in front of the smallest, the poorest, the least regarded woman in the whole valley. And there, in front of the frozen town, the judge took off his hat. He took off his hat to Ada Coyle, and he bowed his grey head to her, and the town made no sound at all, because there was no sound in any of them for a thing like that. Now they stood face to face, the two of them, the way they had sat face to face once, at the two ends of a bench 60 years gone. And if you have been with this story from the platform in 1871, you can see the two women in the one, the girl of 12, with the wide-awake eyes and the mended dress, and the old woman of 72, with the bent hands and the thin shawl. The same steady look coming up out of both faces across all that time. The judge looked at her a long moment. Then he asked her, in front of the whole town, the question the whistle had cut off 60 years before when he was 10 and the train came and there was no time. "Will you tell me your name?" And she told him. "Ada," she said. "Ada Coyle." "Ada," the judge said, the name he had never had, the name of the woman he had carried in him, nameless for 60 years. And he said it again, quiet, as though he were setting it down at last, in a place he had kept empty for it. "Ada." And he closed her bent old hand around the penny, the way she had once closed his. "Now you are waiting perhaps for the reckoning, for the false claimers to be shamed in front of the town, for the judge to turn and name them. He does not. That is not what this story is for, and it never was." Ruth Calloway stood among the crowd with her good shawl on, and the women who had come with their $5 and their loaves of bread and their borrowed stories, and no one pointed at them, and no one named them. They did it to themselves, and it was enough. Ruth looked at the small woman she had passed on the street 1,000 times and never once seen, and at the great man bowing his head to her, and something went through Ruth's face that no punishment could have put there. She understood, all at once, what she had done in the store that week, reaching for a reward, with a story she had half built out of wanting, while the true thing had been standing at the back of every room the whole time, holding a sewing basket. Ruth lowered her eyes. That was all. That was the whole of the reckoning. and it fell where reckonings do the most good, which is on the inside, where no one has to strike a blow to make it land. And the town looked at Ada now, and went on looking, as though it were seeing her for the very first time, which, in the way that matters, it was. You could watch it move through the hall, the seeing. A week ago, she had been a name on a poorhouse list, a bent old woman late on her room, a thing the county meant to tidy away in the new year. Now the grandest man any of them had known stood bareheaded before her and called her the reason he had a life at all. And the town's eyes came round to her and found, where they had always found nothing worth the looking, a person had always been a person, standing right there, the whole time. The poorhouse talk died in the room that night and never came back. You cannot send to the county home the woman who made a federal judge, and the town knew it, and was ashamed, in the quiet way a town is capable of being ashamed, and set about at once, as people do, to make it right. By the next morning, the invitations had begun, and they did not stop. They came to the door of her rented room, the room she was 3 months behind on, one after another all that day. The boarding house women, the shopkeepers, the farm wives who had come in for the assembly and stayed, each with a thing in her hands and a place at her table to offer. Come to Sunday dinner, Mrs. Coyle. Come and sit at our fire. There is a room at our place, a good warm room, and you'd be no trouble at all. It was not the money, though the back rent was quietly seen to. It was the other thing, the thing she had gone without. So long she had stopped believing it was owed to anyone like her. A place at a table, a door held open, the plain human welcome of a town that had decided at last that she was one of its own. And the judge, before he went, asked her for one thing, and it was not a thing anyone had expected. He did not offer her money, or he did, and she would not have it. And he did not press, because he seemed to understand, without being told, that money was the one gift that would have turned the whole thing back into charity. And charity was the very thing this story had spent 3 parts undoing. What he asked her for was supper, a place at her table one evening before his train left, the poorest table in the county, the mending widow's table, with whatever was on it. That was the whole of the repayment the grand old man asked of the life he had crossed a country to find. To sit down across from her, at her own table, and eat what she set out, the way a man sits down with his own people. And she made him supper, and he ate it. And the 2 old faces, across that small table were the faces of 2 children, who had once shared a bench for 3 minutes in the dark, and had, 60 years and a whole country later, finally got the rest of the conversation. And before he left, they went down to the depot together, and they sat down on the bench. The same bench, the grey wood at the end of the platform, worn smooth by 60 years of waiting, where a boy had once sat alone at one end in the dark, and a girl had come and sat at the other. They sat on it side by side now, the 2 of them, an old man and an old woman, in the low copper light of a Nebraska evening. And they did not need to sit at the 2 ends of it anymore. And they did not need to hurry. And there was no train coming to carry either of them away before the thing could be said. Whatever they said to each other there, the story leaves to them, because some benches you do not crowd. It is enough to know they sat on it together, the last boy on the platform, and the girl who told him he was not the last of anything, with 60 years finally folded up small enough to hold between them. You might think that is the end, and it is nearly the end. But a thing like a penny does not stop with the hand that carried it. It gets passed on. And so there is one more October. It was the next year, and the country had gone deeper into its hard time, and the trains that came through Kestrel Junction now carried a new kind of traveler. Not passengers, but the ragged and the hungry, riding the freight cars. Men and boys thrown loose by the depression, drifting the rails from nowhere to nowhere, looking for work that was not there. You would see them slip off the slowing cars at the edge of town and melt into the dark, wary as deer. And on an evening in that 2nd October, off a slowing freight at the edge of Kestrel Junction, a boy climbed down, thin and dirty and hungry to the bone and alone in the world, the way a certain kind of child has always been alone in the world. He crept into the depot out of the wind and found it was not empty. 2 old people were sitting on the bench at the end of the platform. And there was, of all the unlikely things, supper. They had taken to sitting there of an evening, Ada and the judge. For he came back when the court would let him, October after October, to Kestrel Junction and the bench. And they saw the boy in the shadows, hungry, half wild, ready to bolt. And they did not chase him off. They fed him. They gave him what they had brought, and let him eat it there, on the bench between them in the failing light, and asked him nothing he did not want to answer. And when he had eaten and was warm, and the fear had gone out of his shoulders a little, the old woman took something out of her pocket and reached over and closed the boy's hand around it. He opened his fingers in the last of the light. It was a penny, a single worn copper penny, old past reading, warm from her pocket. "Nobody doesn't want you," Ada told him. "Your people are just farther down the line. And that is the end of it, and the shape of the whole thing, if you stand back now and look. A penny given on a bench in the dark when the giver had almost nothing, and the getting of it was almost nothing. And it was enough to carry a boy the whole length of a life, and to come back 60 years later and lift a forgotten woman up in the eyes of her town, and then to go on again, down the line, into the hand of the next child the world had left standing on a platform. That is how the good things move, this story would tell you. Not in fortunes, in pennies. In a place at a table, a door held open, a few plain words said to somebody in the dark who had stopped expecting to hear them. Passed down the line, hand to cold hand, farther than any of the hands that pass it will ever see. The last thing you can see as the light goes is the grey bench at the end of the platform, and 2 old people and a fed boy sitting on it in the dusk, and far off down the shining rails, growing smaller, the red lamps of a train going on into the dark, carrying whatever it carried, farther down the line,